Kylie, pretend you're me doing a YouTube video. Hi guys, I'm Haley Rogers from Found in Fire Studios. Today I'm going to be showing you how I assemble one of my little terrariums. I've been putting terrariums together for a couple years now, and it's just kind of the niche that I've found myself in that I really enjoy. I get to sculpt with polymer clay. It's naturey. Everybody loves fairy gardens, you know. So this one in particular is going to be a little bit different because it's actually going to be a home for my pet spider. Actually, I don't have a spider for this one yet, so that's a good excuse to go buy another spider. Yes, I have pet spiders. Jumping spiders, they're really cute. If you've ever seen Lucas the spider, that's a jumping spider. He's got the big cute eyes. I've recently gotten into that hobby, and my two interests have kind of collided. I get to turn my art into a house for a little critter. So that's what you'll be seeing here. Even if you don't like spiders, though, it should still be applicable. Everybody loves fairy gardens, and that's pretty much what this is. It's just got some sheet plastic and mesh on the sides to keep a spider from escaping. So, excuse me. Alright, so I have some fun little greenery bits to put in there, some sculpted mushrooms that I've made. This little base right here is just a piece of plastic that I'll build up on using aluminum foil and some plaster. And my favorite part is going to be these little fairy lights. I'm gonna install these into here, and you'll be able to light it up, and my little spider will have some stars. So here we go. Alright, I've got all my supplies laid out. I'll go ahead and get started. I have this piece of plexiglass. I sanded it so the plaster will stick really good. I'm going to be building up on this base so that the piece is removable, because with a spider you're going to want to be able to clean its little house out. It's got all the webs and stuff. I'm going to be using these two little magnets so that when it's in there it'll be pretty secure to the metal cage. I don't want it to wiggle around and accidentally squish the spider. So we'll go ahead and mix up some plaster. Adhere the magnets on here with it. Just pile it on there. Make sure they don't move. Now we're going to use aluminum foil as the shape for the base. We'll fold that up, squish it together, shape it until it's the right look. You want to squish it pretty tight. You don't want too many air holes, or you want it to be really compact. Otherwise, it'll leave room for fractures in the plaster if it gets bumped into or something like that. Stick it into the plaster and repeat. We're going to build it up in layers like a cake. So I'm gonna kind of figure out what shape this next layer is gonna be before I slather on some icing. I want to make sure I get in all the little cracks and crevices, because again, if there's air in there, it's more likely to crack as it dries out. Once I complete the last layer, I mix up some plaster that's pretty thick and just mush it on there to give it that rough boulder surface. And I'll take a paintbrush and dab in some of the cracks to make sure that everything's covered. I don't want any aluminum foil peeking through. Once the plaster is dried, the surface is pretty rough. Feels like sandpaper, so you really need to sand it down. I use some fine grit sandpaper. I sand in all the cracks and crevices and places that a spider could get to. Once I finish sanding, I dust it off a little bit and begin to paint. I mix up a little bit of black and brown with a bunch of water to make a nice wash. I chose this watercolor brush because it will hold a lot of water. It will take less time using a brush like this. It only takes a tiny bit of paint to make a wash like this. I actually put too much in there. I used some test scraps from one of the tubs of plaster and tried the washes out to make sure I got it just the right color. Once I'm happy with it, I spread it onto the rock. It's actually really satisfying to just watch the paint do its thing. Once I completed a layer of gray, I switched over to brown to give it some depth and to give it a more natural look. Once the paint has dried, I pull out my little hand drill and try to figure out where exactly I want to position the mushrooms on the rock and go ahead and drill the holes there. I actually ended up having to drill extra holes and switch it around until I was happy with it. I tested out the mushrooms to make sure that the setup looked good. It was as aesthetically pleasing. And once I was happy with that, I moved on to gluing them in there. I used my heavy-duty hot gun to adhere it to the base to make sure that it would not come loose, especially with the magnets pulling on it. I used my low-temperature hot glue gun to seal around the edges so that no dirt or water could get between the base and the sculpture. I also used it to adhere the mushrooms into the drilled holes. Once the mushrooms were set in place, I pulled out all of my greenery, moss, plastic ferns, and began adhering it onto the base. This part was a little tedious because I could only do little bits at a time. I tried to use a variety of plants to give it a more diverse, natural look. Once I got all the greenery on there arranged how I wanted it, I realized I wanted to throw some quartz crystals in there. So I pulled my hot glue gun and plaster back out and began adhering them onto the surface of the plaster sculpture. And like before, I used a little paintbrush to dab into the corners to make sure that there weren't any uncovered bits or holes that would let water or dirt get in between the plaster and the quartz. Then I had to go back over the new plaster with a wash of paint to make it blend in. When I was finally happy with the base, I got to move on to adding the lights. I used a couple glue dots to stick the battery pack to the bottom of the terrarium. That way it would be removable when I needed to replace the batteries. I ran the lights through a slot near the door, and then I arranged them around the mushrooms and the crystals until I was happy with it. Once I got them set up, it was basically done. And here's the finished product. I'm really happy with it, and I've actually decided to list it on my Etsy shop. I'll leave a link in the description below. If nobody snags this in the next couple months, I'm definitely going to buy a new spider. Thanks for watching.